We do want to get to the latest on the Israel-Hamas war, though, and for that we bring in national security analyst and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. As always, Hal, it's good to see you. Let's get straight into it. President Biden said Wednesday that he would not supply offensive weapons to Israel that Israel could use to launch an all-out assault on Rafah over concern for the well-being of the more than 1 million civilians that are sheltering there. So my question is, no weapons from the U.S. on that front, okay. But what does Israel already have in their stockpile, Hal? Do they even need new weapons from the U.S. in order to carry out some sort of Rafah assault?
Also, they have what they need in order to do some sort of major assault, major offensive, if you will, in Rafah. Their issue is that once they burn through that ammunition, they're going to need to be resupplied with more ammunition. There are some special things they might need. For example, JDAM's kits. These are they're basically kits that JDAM's is a joint-directed aerial munition system. It's basically taking basic dumb bombs, if you will, and it makes them smart. And so that's one of the restricted things, and that's something they may need sooner rather than later. There was also some other precision-guided munitions. Interestingly, though, what came out today was apparently artillery was being withheld and tank rounds were being withheld. That was the first time that I'd heard they were holding that level of munitions back. And certainly some have actually started to use the term embargo to describe the scope of what the White House is doing. I'm sure the White House does not use the term embargo. They're just saying it's a delay or a pause, but it's not quite clear what Israel has to do to get past this, short of what basically the White House is saying, which is don't do the Rafah military operation. And of course, the issue on that is that they're looking at that. They're looking at these munitions. They're concerned that if or when Israel goes into Rafah, that they will use these munitions. Some of them are very large as part of that, and it will cause a lot of collateral damage, which is another way of saying civilian casualties.
I'm curious, Hal, what does this say about the current state of Israeli-U.S. relations?
I think what it says is tense. It's, you know, I don't know how many months, and I do think it is months now, that the U.S. has been asking for a detailed plan as far as what Israel intends to do in terms of evacuating civilians, safeguarding civilians, if they go into Rafah militarily. And to this day, to this afternoon, still, the White House is saying they have not seen a credible plan put forward by the Israeli Defense Force, or put forward by Israel, I should say, to evacuate those civilians, and they're not sure where they would evacuate them to. That's not clear. I would take you back just a little bit. When the war started, it kind of went from north to south, and it started up north in Gaza City, and then moved gradually south to the center of the country, or south center of the country, Khan Yunis, the second largest city. And now everybody that has moved south is now right along the border in Rafah. And so there is no further south for anyone to go. And so what the U.S. is saying is, where do you want them to go? Where do you plan to put them? Overall, Gaza is a fairly small piece of terrain, if you will. There isn't a lot of Gaza to work with. And so that's some of the geospatial limitations, if you will, in terms of how they're looking at this evacuation operation, which is where do you evacuate them to? And honestly, I'm kind of going back to the early days when this conflict started in October. As they were saying go south, the question is, how does the IDF intend to screen civilians when they have to start evacuating back north? And to this day, I've seen nothing, and it certainly looks like the White House is seeing nothing for such a massive screening operation to take place, which, by the way, carries a lot of inherent risk, because when you're screening civilians, certainly Hamas would have no hesitation of using that as an opportunity to attack Israeli Defense Forces with everything from conventional munitions to suicide bombs and anything else you could possibly think of. So it's not something that the IDF wants to do. It's not what Israel wants to do. But when they're literally, their back is up against the wall, Egypt's not going to let the mass movement of Palestinians into Egypt. So they've got to come up with something, and that's why the U.S. is finally using the one lever I think it really has in terms of maybe slowing that down is to say, we're not going to send these munitions until you come up with a plan.
I think that's one of the major questions a lot of people have about this Rafah incursion is when it comes time to move civilians out of the area, and this is what you're talking about, how do you filter out the terrorists from the civilians? That's something that you're not seeing high-level conversations happening about.
It's a difficult conversation. You know, filtering out civilians, filtering out terrorists from civilians is never easy on any given day. Israel's had to do this probably more than any country on the planet. They've had to do this with the West Bank. You know, everybody gets upset about the wall, if you will, on the West Bank and these screening operations that Palestinians in the West Bank have to go through to get into Israel, the same sort of screening operations that prior to October 7th, Palestinians in Gaza Strip had to go through to get into Israel and back and forth. And that was all intended to screen out terrorists, particularly suicide bombers. And there are techniques for dealing with that. They are rather invasive techniques. One of the techniques is you simply have them stripped down, and once they can see there's no bomb attached, then they let them through. You can do that on an individual basis. You can do it on a limited basis when you're talking about cars and vehicles. But when you're looking at something like we see here, where you have a mass of humanity in cars, on, you know, in some cases in wagons pulled by animals and something like this, you can imagine the challenge. If somebody's got their entire household goods on top of a car, you can imagine what someone nefarious could do with that amount of space if they were to pack it full of explosives. You could have a huge, horrendous explosive event that could kill hundreds of people if one of those vehicles was actually a terrorist tool, if you will. And so that's what Israel's concerned about, is that they have a checkpoint and that the checkpoint becomes simply a target for Hamas to basically cause more problems for Israel. And as we've talked about, one of the things that really differentiates Hamas, if you will, is that they don't see more losses as a problem. More losses, more civilian casualties actually works towards their political equation. You know, right now, by their own numbers, they're saying 34,000 have been, over 34,000 have been killed. But if you look at the calculus of Hamas, if they could turn around and say, with any credibility, 50,000 or 60,000 civilians have been killed, that helps them politically. It's a horrendous loss in terms of civilian lives, but that helps them politically because they use that for propaganda purposes on the international stage.
The IDF is continuing to give us updates on their progress with eliminating terrorists from the area. This is what you're looking at from today. They say a commander of Hamas's naval unit was killed in Gaza City. They say he was responsible for several attacks on Israeli territory and against IDF ground troops operating in Gaza. So, Hal, this was in Gaza City. That's in northern Gaza. We've been focusing so much on the activity down south, especially in Rafah, but what has been going on in the northern part of Gaza, and in the central part of Gaza, Han Yunis, Gaza City? What's been taking place in all of these areas while we've been focused on Rafah?
Well, we're focused on Rafah in the south, and you bring up a good point, which is that the IDF has been dealing with pockets of resistance that pop up north. Remember that massive underground tunnel system, you know, the Gaza Metro, if you will. And of course, they've blown up a lot of those tunnels, but within that, there are probably tunnels and certainly underground bunkers and stuff that they have not gotten into, and that occasionally, all of a sudden, they're dealing with a large pocket of resistance that pops up and takes them under fire. It's not like these units moved up north from Rafah to take them under fire. They came from somewhere, and they came from underground in those areas. And that's one of the challenges that the IDF has. It goes through an area, it takes the ground, if you will, the surface of an area, it clears all the buildings and everything else, it looks for all the underground bunkers or tunnel entrances that it can, and then it moves on. And when it moves on, if there's not a physical presence there securing the territory, and they only have so many troops, you can't secure everywhere down there. Eventually, these guys, they're literally a door or something pops up, and the next thing you know, you have 50 or 100 or more Hamas terrorists that are bent on doing some sort of destructive action. And that's the problem they've been running into up north. And that's really what they're concerned about with Rafah. Even if they get some sort of negotiated deal, even if Hamas says they're going to leave Rafah or leave Gaza or something, they're very concerned that they will be dealing with this lingering insurgency / terrorist that will keep popping out of holes and doing various types of attacks.
So another thing, we were just watching, just before we came on air with you, we were watching Matt Miller, the State Department spokesperson, and the first thing that he was asked at the press briefing was about this very thing on your screen. The Biden administration missed a Wednesday deadline to report to Congress on whether Israel is violating international humanitarian law in Gaza, according to 4 sources telling Reuters on Tuesday. This report will likely address concerns over Israel's use of U.S.-supplied weapons in Gaza. I'm curious, Hal, are you familiar with this type of report? Is this supposed to track every single instance of U.S. weapons being used since October 7th? How does it work?
Well, it's supposed to be a comprehensive report. It should talk about the entire war. That's what they kind of promised Congress, that it was going to be an extensive report that would cover basically everything that's been going on. When you're talking about violations of humanitarian law by Israel, they're literally going back to October 7th. I didn't see anything that said they were going back before October 7th. It just said October 7th. And I don't know if it's limited to Gaza. It also looks like it may include anything that's happened on the West Bank as well. This report is to go to Congress. It's, Congress is the legislative branch, not to get too simplistic. And of course, the White House is the executive branch. They are 2 co-equal branches of government. The White House did promise that today they would have this report ready to Congress. And that's a deadline that they, in fact, did set. But Congress kind of takes that and says, OK, we're going to see this report from you. And they missed it. And now they're not being very clear at all as to when this report will come out. They're saying they want to make sure it's accurate. I do find it interesting. This report is directly tied to U.S. supplied weapons that can be used against Hamas and be used in the Gaza Strip. Right now there's this withholding, some would say embargo, if you will, of certain categories of those weapons. So I'm kind of wondering, even if the report's not out formally, if there's some elements of the report that are not out yet, that are basically internal discussions within the administration that may have led to that decision to hold back on sending some of those weapons. I'm just kind of wondering that. They haven't said that, and I haven't heard it addressed or asked in quite that way in any of the press conferences. Maybe tomorrow someone will. But I do find it interesting that those 2 things happen at about the same time. Usually as these reports are coming up, look, nobody likes surprises in government, particularly in the executive branch of government. So if there's any indication of where this is going, they would like to have kind of a little heads up as to what's coming down. And if there is some stuff in there that's very critical of what's been happening in Gaza, well, that may be something that they've already started to take action on. Again, that's speculation. They haven't said that yet. But those 2 things did kind of coincide right about the same time.
So one last thing I want to hit on in Gaza. Yaya Sinir, who was the mastermind behind the October 7th massacre, is believed to be using hostages as human shields to hold off Israeli soldiers seeking to capture him in a tunnel deep below Gaza. This echoes a similar report from February when the Washington Post said that the IDF believed that Sinir was hiding in tunnels beneath Han Yunis, surrounded by a human shield of hostages. I'm curious, Hal, at this point, does it feel there is any sort of real urgency to eliminate Sinir in the immediate future? Obviously, the IDF has an extensive list of priorities, but where does it feel like Sinir stacks up on that list?
I think it's fairly high up on the list. The only question is, if you take out Yaya Sinir, what does that do to Hamas? Is it just ignore that? I've been involved with a lot of different types of wars, to include the war on drugs, if you will. And one of their famous techniques was what's called kingpin operations, where you basically take out, and by take out, I don't necessarily mean kill, sometimes arrest, incarcerate, a top kingpin in the drug trade. The problem with that is there was always a bunch of other people who were willing to immediately step into that role and continue the illegal drug business. And the same tends to be true, more or less, with terrorism, and certainly with a group like this. If you take out Yaya Sinir, it's a symbolic loss, but operationally, does that really hinder what Hamas is doing? Obviously, in the negotiations that are taking place, it would hinder it because you wouldn't have the already established go-to person, decision maker in the Gaza Strip that those Hamas representatives outside of the Gaza Strip would normally interface with. So that might be a problem for him. So I would say he's high on the list. I would think what's really high on the list for the Israelis is getting in there and rescuing the hostages. And if he is surrounded by those hostages, then once they're in there, they would want to continue and go ahead and take him out as well. And by take him out, could be take him prisoner, or it could be something more kinetic and final, such as what we did to Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. In Pakistan.